Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here with us today. My name is Dora. I'm joining you from Budapest, Hungary. And you can also see here Sebastian, also under the name Qesher, also joining from Budapest. It's the two of us who founded Qesher almost 6 years ago now. And ever since, we've been organizing these Zoom presentations. Those of you who join us regularly, you know that our main profile is doing virtual tours or lectures about cities or countries or regions' Jewish heritage. So we focus on Jewish history, Jewish heritage, and also the present day situation of Jews in different places and Jewish communities in different places. And of course, I'm sure many of you know, and if you don't, then we're very happy that you're finally joining us, that we also have a book club series in which we introduce books and authors who somehow connect to this overall theme of Jewish life from around the world. And we are very happy to welcome today Dvora Treisman, who was born after the war in the Dominican Republic. She grew up in Los Angeles and lived much of her adult life in Berkeley until she moved to Barcelona when she was 52. She's the editor of Ken Nirim, Reflections and Stories, a collection of 34 essays by former members of Hashomer HaTzair in Los Angeles during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and the author of the memoir No Regrets, A Life in Catalonia. She lives in Figueres with her little rescue dog. And today she's going to present to us her newest book, which is called Stories My Father Told Me, from Warsaw, Moscow, Algeria, Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Dominican Republic. So thank you so much, Dvora, for sharing your book with us, and thank you everyone for being here. Dvora is going to do a presentation, so that's going to be the format, but you're welcome to put your questions as she speaks, and when she finishes, we'll open up for Q&A. So I'll pass the word to Dvora now.
Okay, well, thank you for that nice introduction. I'm really very honored to be here, and I'm very grateful for all of you who have shown up to learn a little bit about my father's story and our book, because the book was written, what I wrote was based on what my father had written for me. Uh, this is the cover of the book. It's one of two photos. No, back to the beginning. Dora. Yes, thank you. Uh, it's one of two photos that was taken during the war when my parents were living in Kazakhstan. So that was between 1943 and 1946. Over 230,000 Polish Jews, the largest group of survivors, survived because they escaped to the Soviet Union. However, very few of them wrote memoirs, and very little has been written about them. Many of them don't consider themselves Holocaust survivors because they hadn't gone through the horror under the Nazis. I had no idea when I was writing the book how neglected that story is. I had heard about it all my life, and I assumed everyone else also knew. I had started to write an essay, but there was one small but important fact that I wasn't sure about. So I took out the memoir that my father had written years before and started to read it again. I began making a list of names, relationships, a timeline. I was hooked. My father's family was bourgeois, not rich, but well-to-do, and non-observant. They didn't speak Yiddish at home, they spoke Russian. His father was a businessman. Part of why I say that my father's life was unusual is because so many people think of Polish or Eastern European Jews as living in the shtetl and being religious and Tevye the milkman and all that stuff. Well, my father came from a very different family and a different environment. Uh, One of my grandfather's enterprises was a bus line. In the mid-1920s, in front of the Hotel Europejski, one of the grand hotels of Europe, an American had come and parked a big, beautiful bus. The bus was dark blue with a yellow stripe. It had 36 luxurious leather seats with armrests, and it had Mac inscribed on the front grille. The bus sat on display in front of the hotel for several weeks, and thousands of people came to see it. The American was advertising it as the seventh wonder of the world, and it could be had for $13,000. My dad's father bought it. He hired a big, bulky, handsome man to be the driver. This man had previously worked for Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the men who murdered Rasputin. The same year as the bus purchase, the first paved highway in Poland was finished, replacing the old cobblestone roadway. And so the luxurious Mack ran 3 times a day from Warsaw to Radomi, a span of 100 kilometers, along the smooth new highway. When he was 64 years old, my dad began to write his memoir. It took him 3 years to write it, and then 14 years to get it typed. He wrote by hand in English, but his handwriting was in the Polish style, and the manuscript included many Polish and other foreign names of people and places, and presented a challenge to the American women who were his typists and who didn't know Polish. Years after his death, when I started to work on the book, I found countless misspellings of people and places. I don't know Polish either, so it took me more time than it should have to finally figure out that many of those T's were supposed to be an L with stroke. Next slide, please. This is my father, Rafał Feliks Buszejkin, and this is the earliest photo I have of him taken in 1931, when he was 19 years old. He had just graduated high school and was about to go to France to study medicine at the University of Montpellier. He was an only child, born in Warsaw in 1912. In 1915, after World War I broke out, his family left Warsaw. Together with his mother's parents, one of her 2 brothers, and her aunt's family, they all left Poland and moved to Russia. My father was 7 years old and living in Moscow when the Russian Revolution broke out. Thus, his memory of this monumental event was from the perspective of a child. They had been living in Moscow for about 2 years when one October morning there was a tremendous noise. His father gathered everyone in the family, and to my father's delight, put them all into the bathroom and told them to stay there and wait. He was back in an hour. The Bolshevik uprising had begun. That evening, all the tenants of the building met to discuss what to do about possible plundering or violence, and they decided to hang a large copper pot, usually used to make preserves, from the chandelier in the foyer. They also left a hammer that could be used to sound the alarm. The next day, Dad's audacious older cousin, Fira, convinced him to go down with her after supper and bang the hammer against the pot and see what would happen. The noise was deafening. After banging, they hid behind a door and waited. Nothing happened. Eventually, they went back to their respective apartments. They waited for punishment, but it didn't come. The next morning, when it became clear that the alarm had been sounded, but no one had done anything, the adults were ashamed, and Fira and Dad were heroes. At least that was from Dad's perspective. 2 weeks later, he was awoken early by his mother, dressed, and put in a wagon with the rest of the family. The cousins were in a second wagon. They were going back to Warsaw. For the next 2 weeks, they traveled at night through forests, avoiding any towns, villages, or the main roads. Dad was frightened, not so much of the war, it seems, but of half of a dead horse that he saw lying amongst the trees. His grandfather told him that the other half had been eaten by wolves. My father's mother was Sonia, and her mother, whose name I don't know, would come twice a year from Baranovice to visit them in Warsaw. She loved to go to watch Greco-Roman wrestling, and when she came to see Zygmunt Breihard, the famous modern Hercules. After the performance, she took Dad to meet the famous man, where she plied him with questions. Many of the wrestlers in those days were Jewish, and surprising as it was to learn that in 1920s Warsaw, professional wrestling was a spectator sport with a large Hasidic Jewish following, even more so was that my great-grandmother was a fan. In September 1920, Dad started school at a private co-ed Jewish school called Felicia Buki, a modern school for that time. The scholarship level was very high, the language of instruction was Polish, and the distinguished faculty included Leopold Infeld, the physicist who later worked with Albert Einstein at Princeton. They were in school 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, from 8 to 2, taking 5 different classes. They stayed in one room, 2 children per bench, the same places all year, and the teachers came to them. From 4 to 7, they had elective subjects like carpentry, bookbinding, sewing, physical fitness, chess, and reading room. Some of the friendships he made there lasted a lifetime, at least for those who survived the Holocaust that would begin 19 years later. When problems erupted at his school between the teachers and the director, his parents enrolled him in a different school, an all-boys high school where the majority of the boys were Catholic. Dad and his friends from Buki, who also went to this new school, were suddenly in a very different environment. Their scholastic level was much higher than these students, but they found that physical strength was now also important. Dad already excelled in sports, and when boxing became available, he signed up. It became his favorite sport, and he competed both at school and at the Warsaw Maccabi Sports Club. In his last year of high school, Dad managed to attend class only 8 times the whole year. Those 8 days were when his father gave him the money to pay school tuition. The rest of the days, he played hooky with friends. Their daily curriculum usually began with a game of poker. Then they would move on to renting boats and racing on the river, or getting up to some kind of mischief. One of their finer exploits happened at the Boguslavsky movie theater, where, during a film, they went in pairs, pretending to be electricians, unscrewed all the light bulbs, put them in their satchels, and left. The next day, all the newspapers reported on the prank, saying it was students from out of town who had taken the bulbs from the theater. Next, please. Next slide. When I posted this photo in a Jewish group on Facebook, where a post rarely gets more than 3 or 4 reactions, over 1,500 people reacted. Many people commented, and a few of them said, "Your dad was a hunk." This photo was taken in the Polish countryside, probably in 1932, after his return from France and just before he went to study in Algeria. Next slide, please. When he finally graduated high school a year late in 1931, he wanted to study engineering at the Warsaw Polytechnic, but instead his parents sent him to Montpellier in France to study medicine. There, he raced bicycles, played rugby, and also studied. With his bike, he also did a fair amount of touring, visiting Marseille, Arles, Barcelona, and some of the nearby seaside resorts. In Arles, he attended a bullfight in the Roman Colosseum and was disgusted by what he said was a prolonged slaughter of a proud animal. One day he met Josephine Baker when she came to his rooming house to see how students of different races and nationalities got along. Although he had no problem with blood when he boxed, when he had to dissect a frog, he decided that medicine was not for him. So after his first year, he announced to his parents that he was going to Algiers to study agronomy. He seemed to like everything about Algeria. He made interesting friends at school, one from Belgium, the other from Laos. He visited the Kasbah, toured the coast and the Atlas Mountains on his bicycle, enjoyed eating couscous, and enjoyed his studies. Near the end of that school year, he became ill with an inflammation of the joints, so severe that he couldn't move. His parents told him to go to Biskra, a posh oasis town known for its curative facilities, 400 miles away in the Sahara. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the spa hosted celebrities such as Bela Bartok, Oscar Wilde, Henri Matisse, F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, André Gide, and Karl Marx. The road to Biskra was bumpy, and the old bus was overcrowded with Arabs. He endured his discomfort by dozing off. He couldn't move. He couldn't even get off the bus to pee. Half asleep, he suddenly recognized the familiar aroma of gefilte fish. Looking around, he discovered the Arab who was eating it and asked him in French where he had bought it. It's not likely it was gefilte fish, but whatever it was, the man told him that his wife made it and offered Dad some, and tea as well. It turned out that this man was not an Arab. He was a Sephardic Jew who told Dad his budget would get him a 2-day stay at Biskra and wouldn't be enough to pay for a doctor. He invited him instead to come to his town, Bou Sadah, and get cured there. This man and his friends got Dad cured in 5 days. No doctor, no medicine, and no charge. They simply buried him in hot sand for 45 minutes each day. After that, Dad stayed there for a while. He made friends, rode Arabian horses, and spent most evenings sipping tea and eating pastries. One day he suggested to his new friends that to avoid getting too fat, they should start a sports club. The idea spread through town, and more than half the male population signed up, both Jews and Arabs. They supported it and they raised money. They named it Maccabi. This is an old faded photo of the boxing team. But if you look closely, you can see that the insignia on the front of their t-shirts is a Mogen David. My father's the hunk in long pants. My father's best friend there was George, a Sephardic Jew, about 30 years old, over 6 feet tall, and the regional director of a bank. Dad was already in a relationship with my mother, who was in Warsaw, and he introduced George by correspondence to my mother's sister, Astusha. I think that might be George all the way to the right of the photo. Next photo, please. Astusha was the younger of my mother's 2 older sisters, and both my mother and my father said that she was exceptional. She was intelligent, beautiful, talented in many things, including piano, art, and poetry. She was living in Warsaw, and George wrote to her there. They corresponded for years, but they never met. My father left Algeria in May 1933, called back home when his father went bankrupt. Later, when the war started, George wanted to get Astusha out of Poland, but she didn't want to leave her parents and chose to stay in Warsaw with them and with her brother Jakub. Mom's other sister, Irena, also remained in Warsaw with her new husband. My parents, married the year before, left Warsaw and escaped to the Soviet Union. Dad managed to find George after the war. In the 1960s, he and his entire family left Algeria to live in Paris. I met them when I was in Paris in 1982. There were 10 of us around the lunch table. George, his parents, his brother's wife, and their children, and we ate rabbit couscous. The few photos my mother had of her family, like this one, were probably the ones that Astucia had sent to George during their correspondence. George never married. Next slide, please. While Dad was away in Algeria, his father went bankrupt trying to help the cousins that they had gone to Russia with. He had become depressed and hadn't left the apartment in 6 weeks. They had been relatively well-to-do, but now they were completely broke, and for the first time in her life, Sonia had begun to take some control. She borrowed money to pay for Dad's return from Algeria, and she rented his room to a young couple and his father's study to a 40-year-old rich bachelor. When Dad got back from Algeria, he slept on the sofa. After 3 years of various small business ventures and odd jobs, Dad finally took a professional job as an agronomist with a meatpacking plant, and soon he was sent on a buying trip. He was given 300,000 zloty, sent 200 kilometers away to buy cattle, and told to do whatever necessary to accommodate the two officials who were overseeing the sales. These two men liked to drink and play poker, so that's what Dad did. Not having any money of his own, he used company money to bet. At first he lost, but then gathering his wits and drawing on his experience from his days of being a truant high school student, he won it all back. At that point, he excused himself from any more gambling. Once he had that steady job, he and my mother decided to get married. He said that his parents didn't want him to marry her because at the time her father's business wasn't doing well and there wouldn't be a dowry. But my mother told me that her family didn't want her to marry him because he was difficult and had a bad temper. So on 26 May 1938, they eloped. Her sister Astucia was her witness, and his good friend Adik Levine was his. My father might have been difficult, but he saved my mother's life. He was the one who made the decision to leave Warsaw and go east. All the rest, my four grandparents, Abram, Sonia, Itzhak, and Dora, my mother's brother Jakub, and her two sisters, Astucia and Irena, remained in Warsaw and were all murdered by the Nazis. Next, please. When my parents left Warsaw, they went together with two friends, Vladek and his wife Eva, and headed east. Approaching the border, they were stopped by a German motorcycle patrol of 5 soldiers who asked for their papers. They saw Dad's name, Rafał Feliks Buszejkin, Mom's name, Maria Buszejkin, and the names of their friends. None of them were Jewish names, and they let them pass. When they reached the bridge over the Bug River, the border between Poland and Soviet Belarus, the Germans were ordering Jews to the right and others to the left. Dad led his group to the left. When he got to the front of the line, he handed over the two passports, and they asked where they were going. Baranovice, he said. They asked if he had any money. He told them yes, but he couldn't give them any because he only had 100 zloty and a long journey ahead. They were allowed to pass and walk across the bridge, where they immediately found Russian soldiers. The Russians were friendly, showed them an army truck, and said they could sit in the back. But Dad and Mom waited for Vladek and Eva, who soon showed up. They had given the Germans 200 zloty to get across. My parents spent 6 years in the Soviet Union. First, they went to Baranovice in Belarus, where Dad had an uncle, Julian, a colorful character who once worked for Count Radziwill, and where they spent 8 or 9 months. Then in May or June of 1940, they were rounded up with other Poles who refused Soviet citizenship and sent to Siberia, where they lived in a work camp in log houses. My father was put in charge of growing food for the camp and oats for the horses. Later, in the fall of 42, like most of the Polish refugees, my parents were granted amnesty. This meant that they could leave Siberia and settle within some limits in other parts of the Soviet Union until the end of the war. After some misadventures, they settled in Jambul, Kazakhstan. This is the other of the two photos of my mother, dressed in Uzbek costume and taken when they were living in Kazakhstan. My parents lived for over 4 years in Jambul, where Dad worked as an agronomist, overseeing the agricultural production of 5 kolkhozy, or collective farms. This meant that although life was hard, they had it better than most of the other Polish refugees. Although during that time, he did spend 2 months in prison for refusing Soviet citizenship. His boss was Russian, but the people at the kolkhozy were Kazakhs, who had their own food, drinks, customs, language, and culture, which Dad adapted to, sleeping in a yurt, eating on the floor with the men, racing horses, and learning some Kazakh. In 1943, the Kazakhs were joined by 2 large groups from the Caucasus Mountains who were forced to move by the Soviet government. They were the Karachis and Chechens, and they brought with them even more cultural variety. Someone pointed out to me that all 3 of those ethnic groups would probably have been Muslim. Maybe so, but Dad never mentioned it. Next slide, please. The war ended in 1945, and the evacuation of Polish citizens began 12 April 1946. When they got back to Warsaw, they found a few old friends, but their families had all been murdered, and the city was in ruins. So after a few months, they left. They spent some months in Nice on the French Riviera, where my father had a cousin, Solomon, who gave him a job. My parents had a good time in Nice. My father was working, and they had enough money to rent a car on weekends and drive up and down the coast and enjoy themselves. But they wanted to go to the United States, and immigration visas to the Dominican Republic was the best they could get. This photo is of my mother on the French Riviera. I was conceived when they first arrived in Nice. They stayed at a pension near the Promenade des Anglais, and it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that my mother told me that the pension they had always talked about was actually one of those French pay-by-the-hour hotels, and they were the only regular couple living there. Next slide, please. I was born in Sosúa, Dominican Republic, just a few weeks after my parents arrived there in 1947. Sosúa was a Jewish refugee colony made up mostly of German and Austrian Jews. A settler received a ready-made farm consisting of 100 acres of land for pasturing cows, fenced with barbed wire, a 2-room house furnished with mahogany furniture, 2 horses, 10 rams for the head of the family, 2 cows for the mother, and 1 cow for each child, as well as some chickens and pigs. All this cost $9,000 and was to be paid off in 99 years. Next, please. On his new farm, Dad worked for weeks with a helper, breaking up rocks, smoothing out the surface, hauling topsoil in with wheelbarrows, and then seeding a field of corn. It grew so well that a newspaper from the capital sent a photographer and put a photo of the corn on their front page. Being an agronomist, my dad enjoyed the farming, but my mother was not happy. We were there for 2 years when we finally got the visas to go to the US, and we flew to New York in June 1949. Next, please. America was a new type of adventure. First getting a job, then getting a better job or a second job, whatever it took to get ahead. Setting up a home, learning English, learning the system, and all the rest that new immigrants are faced with. First, Dad got a job on a farm in New Jersey, but Mom had had enough of farms. So we moved to New York, where at first we stayed at a hotel provided by the Joint on 87th and Broadway called Capitol Hall. Capitol Hall was where my parents met Felix and Luba. Luba was Russian and Felix was Polish and had fought with the partisans during the war. Their daughter, Telsa, was born after the war in a displaced persons camp in Germany. The two couples hit it off and remained good friends for the rest of their lives, always breaking out in old Russian songs when they got together. This photo was taken in New York. That's Telsa on the left, her mom Luba, my mom, me, and my dad. Luba and Felix moved to Petaluma, about an hour north of San Francisco, and went into chicken farming. Jewish chicken farming in Petaluma started in the 1920s as a kind of utopian community of left-wing Jews and thrived through the 30s and into the 50s. Next, please. We lived in New York for 5 years until the summer of 54, when my father decided that we would move to Los Angeles, where the weather was better and there would be more professional opportunities. And maybe what he was really looking for was a new adventure. Dad went first. He loaded his 3/4 ton truck with 2.5 tons of all our worldly possessions. He drove out of Brooklyn and was soon stopped on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. "Where are you going?" the highway patrol guy asked. "To California." "You have a heavy load for this truck. Could we take a look?" They uncovered the edge of the canvas, saw our household stuff and Dad's tools, and told him, "Okay, go to California and good luck." It took him 5.5 days, driving alone, to reach LA. He left everything in a friend's garage and flew back to get us. He bought a new Dodge car, and off we went. It took 9 days to drive, pausing to see the sights, and we finally came to a stop in Santa Monica, where Route 66 ends at the Pacific Ocean. Next slide, please. In Los Angeles, after renting a house for a few years, my parents bought a home in a moderately priced part of the Los Feliz neighborhood. We got a dog and named him Yankee Doodle. My father started off as a gardener and eventually got his landscape contractor's license. He managed to spend his whole working life just as he wanted, working outdoors. My parents had a healthy social life, with most of their friends being Polish Jews. When friends came over, they all spoke Polish, and Dad would often get out his harmonica or guitar, and they would all sing Polish songs. Sometimes we would go away for the weekend, usually to the desert at Palm Springs. After 32 years of marriage, my parents divorced when I was 23 and had been married for 2 years. My mother remarried and then got divorced again. My father also remarried. Halina was a Polish Catholic and had worked in the Polish underground and had been interned as an enemy of the Reich. She survived Bergen-Belsen, Ravensbrück, and Neustadt Gliw. After the war, she married a Polish Jew. They were all part of the same social group in LA and had known each other for years. My parents stayed in touch. as friends and would sometimes get together. At the end of their lives, my father and Helena were living in the desert near Palm Springs. Next, please. In his memoir, my father wrote that one of his mother's aunts had married a man by the name of Felix. So was that his given name or his surname? He said this man owned one of the biggest forest plantations in the region, but he didn't say what region, and he had two sons. The two sons were sent to study in Switzerland. He never says the name of the older son, but the younger one was Solomon. Later, he refers to him as Solomon Felix. So this was a surname, but was it Felix with an F or Felix with a P? When the Russian Revolution broke out, the father was killed, and Solomon left Switzerland and went to France. Sometime in the 1920s, he came to visit Dad's parents in Warsaw. He had been working in Marseille as a longshoreman, but he had come to Poland to look for a wife. He went to Vilno, found a nouveau riche young girl, and got married. 2 months after the wedding, he was back in Warsaw, dismayed at how uncouth and uncivilized his wife was. He was going back to Marseille. After the war, in 1946, when my parents went to Nice to wait for their visas, Solomon was the cousin that my father went to work for. In October 2023, I posted a question to the Facebook Jewish genealogy group, Tracing the Tribe, and asked about the name. Was either Felix or Pelix ever used as a surname in Poland? At first, I didn't get any replies, but 5 weeks later, a guy called Greg responded about a postcard he had seen on eBay. Greg is a group member, a genealogist, and a Judaica postcard collector who wrote, Dvora, this is a 1914 postcard addressed to Solomon Felix in Switzerland from his father, CH, which would be Chaim Felix, in Minsk. Accompanying the message was an image of the postcard with a link to eBay. The postcard was written in Russian, and I asked Greg if he could translate it. Yes, he could. Dear Solomon, we haven't received any letter from you in a long time. Today we are delighted with Verochka's letter. I sent money to Yaakov and you will receive it from him. But transferring money now is difficult, and I really don't know how you will live on our money with the current exchange rate. Try to do something because the time will come when only the unreadable people will be able to exist. God grant that you can come home and get settled. I look forward to your letters. Your father kisses you, C.H. Felix. So, their name was Felix. The father was Chaim. Solomon's older brother was Yaakov, and he also had a sister who they called Ferochka. I bought the postcard, and it arrived in the mail from the German eBay seller a couple of weeks later. Even more thrilling than finding a family memento by chance is actually obtaining it and holding it in your hands. But as wonderful as it was, after a while I decided that I wouldn't keep it. I have no children, and my heirs are not related and not Jewish. The postcard would have no meaning for them. So when I finished the book and I donated my father's original memoir manuscript to the YIVO archive in New York, I included the postcard as well. Next, please. For years, I had this little old red notebook and never gave it any thought. I held on to it because it's a family memento and because in it are some drawings that my parents had done years ago when they were in Kazakhstan. Well, it turned out that this decrepit little pocket-size 4.5 by 6-inch notebook is a little treasure that brought to light several surprises. I had brought it with me when I moved from California to Spain, but then I tucked it away in a drawer for years, where it was safe from dust and forgotten. I thought of it when I was working on the book, took it out, and took another look. Besides the drawings, there was a list of some sort with prices in rubles, some names and addresses, and 3 pages of writing that looked to be in Polish. So I showed my little notebook to that same genealogy group. Someone there pointed out that the insignia of the eagle on the front cover is a symbol of Poland, and of course the initials are my father's. Therefore, it must have been one of the few things he took with him when they fled Warsaw in 1939. A member wrote that the 3 pages of writing aren't Polish, they're Russian. And they're the lyrics to 2 popular songs of the time. One of them is from a Russian film called Twins, and she sent a link to a clip on YouTube. Next slide, please. Twins was a romantic comedy set during World War II and released in 1945, which surprised me that the Russians were making movies then. Having found infant twins at a railway station, Luba, an electrician, played by Ludmila Chelikovskaya, decides to adopt them. Everyone tries to help her except Eropkin, chief of the city trade office, who is instrumental in making the children disappear from Luba's room. After a whole series of funny events and confusions, the real mother of the twins is found, and Eropkin turns out to be their father. Here's a clip from the film with Chelikovskaya singing Wires, a song my parents must have liked if my father went to the trouble to write down the lyrics in his notebook.
Эту песню мою для тебя я пою, ты запомни ее навсегда. Надо мной, над тобой, над широкой землей, словно струны поют провода.
Если милый вдали телеграмму пошли, и печаль пропадет без следа.
И горячий привет,
И сердечный ответ. Принесут, принесут провода.
и горячий привет,
Сердечный ответ. Принесут, принесут провода.
буду слову верна, буду нежность беречь, не забуду тебя никогда. Все несут, провода. Мы заветной порой будем вместе с тобой, но когда же это будет, когда?
И надежды мои, и дыхание любви.
Принесут провода, и надежды мои,
Лиза, наконец.
Next slide, please. The most meaningful thing I found in that notebook was this colored pencil drawing done by my father, signed and dated Jambul, February 1943. But I didn't realize its significance until I had the inscription translated, when I was almost finished with the book. At the bottom, he had written Chilense Lata and Alger. Alger is Algiers in French, but what did the Polish say? Another Tracing the Tribe member translated it for me. Chilense Lata means calf years in Polish and has the same meaning as salad days in English. In the middle of the war in far-off Kazakhstan, he was remembering what was probably the best time of his youth when he was in Algeria. In fact, through most of his life, his favorite stories to tell tended to be from his time in Algeria. And maybe that explained why he liked the desert so much and had always headed off to Palm Springs for weekends, and why he went to live there at the end of his life. Next slide, please. Next image. My father spoke 5 languages: Polish, Russian, French, Spanish, and English. When I took French in high school, he would help me to practice. But whatever I said, he would correct the pronunciation. I couldn't hear the difference, and I found it really annoying. I never seemed to get it right. When I introduced Uri, my future husband, to my father, I thought, well, since they both knew French, they would enjoy conversing in that language. So I left them to it. Later, I asked Uri, how was my father's French? He knows French really well, he said, but he speaks it with a Polish accent. Dad died in 1999. My mom died in 2001, and my dad's second wife, Helena, had died earlier in 1998. All three are buried by each other in the California desert at Palm Springs. My four grandparents were killed in the Holocaust, as were my one uncle and two aunts, all of whom had no children. I never had children either. So after me, there'll be no one to remember my father, my mother, or anyone else in the family. What started out to be an essay ended up being a book, a tribute to my family, but mainly to my father, an unusual Polish Jew for his time. When I undertook this project, my father was already gone. So I decided the best way to turn his first-person memoir manuscript into a book would be to rewrite it as a third-person biography and leave as much of his voice in it as I could, because this was basically his book, not mine. Now people can read about him. Hopefully some of his Polish accent is still there, and the book will remain when I'm gone, and he, my mother, and the rest of the family will continue to be remembered. It's important that these stories get written so that hopefully people will read them, and with each book, learn a little more about the different parts of our history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dvora. It was so nice to hear you speak and share this story with us. And I've read your book, but it was amazing to hear you share it with your own words and see the images. And I just want to say that these images could be each of them part of a movie or an exhibition. They seem so special. So thank you so much for sharing them. And of course, thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to now read some questions if there are any. So let's see if there are. I see that there were some issues with the sound. I hope most people managed to hear at the end. Okay. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm just going through if there were anything in the while we were speaking. What an amazing Jewish story. That's a comment I see. Thank you, Dvora, for sharing your dad's fascinating life story. Oh, there are many. Okay. So there was a comment from Amy about the picture of your mom in the costume, that it was very exquisite and beautiful. What was the most surprising thing you discovered while you were working on the book?
Oh gosh, I don't know, just so much of it. Uh, little bit, I think the book is made up of little bits. There isn't one fantastic story. It's a lot of little pieces. Uh, and so for me, the most fantastic thing is many of those little pieces, like my great grandmother being a, a wrestling fan. I mean, I just can't really imagine that in 1920 Poland. When I always, I had those two photographs of my mother in costume, and they were taken, I thought, in Kazakhstan, so I assumed they were Kazakh costume. But I put those photos on the internet also to two Jewish, one at the genealogy group and another a photo group. And a couple people told me that that's not Kazakh costume, that's Uzbek costume. So how that came to be, I don't really know. But she did her hair in Uzbek style. The cloth of the dress is Uzbek, and so I mean, I learned all kinds of little things. What I didn't learn was about my ancestry, because my father talks a little bit about his father and some of the cousins, and my mother, his mother's aunt. But but he didn't provide any kind of genealogical information. And that's something that I think I might maybe delve into at some point. I saw a comment, someone asked about the book being in a Jewish museum. All the photographs that I showed that were in the presentation today, I think they're all in the book. And I have lots of others also that weren't in the book, as you can't, it wasn't a photo book, it was a textbook, but a book of text. But I donated all the original photographs to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, because they were interested, and also some memorabilia from the Dominican Republic because they have a special interest in that. And the book is also at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem and several Jewish libraries. And
Thank you. The next question was from Terry. How and why did you end up in Spain?
ah, I I was divorced twice, and my third husband was is I divorced three times altogether. My third husband was a Catalan, and we came to live in Barcelona when he retired. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
What refugees do you remember from Sosua?
What refugees?
Yeah, if you remember, I mean, you were very small, you were not even two, but if you
Yeah,
had any memories or if your parents
no.
told you anything about that life.
Uh, they talked a little bit. They didn't talk too much about Sosua. It was a small part. We were only there for 2 years. We came in June. I was born in June 47, 2 or 3 weeks after they got there. And we left in June 49. So I don't remember anything about
And
Sosua.
and why did they leave?
They never wanted to go in the first place. They just went there as in transit. They were waiting to go to the US.
Hmm.
And somehow Israel never came up. My father never mentioned it as a possibility when they came back from, when the war ended. So they were just looking to go to the US and they couldn't because there was a quota for Jews. And so they went to the Dominican Republic because they could.
Hmm. Thank you. There's a question, what difficulties did your parents have in Kazakhstan? You mentioned already a few. Um, if you want to share a bit more. I think this is a topic that you could write an entire book about
Yeah.
the life Jews had
Yeah.
in these faraway places
Well,
while they were there.
if people are interested in the experience of the Soviet Union, that's about half the book. It's not very long in my presentation, but it's just everyday stuff. My dad talks about his work and about the people they met, problems he had with the secret police, but what they ate, just how they grew the food. When they were in Siberia, he convinced the guy in charge of the work camp that people should take one pane out of their double paned windows so that they could make a hothouse so that they could have vegetables for longer during the year, not just potatoes. So, just lots of little things like that.
Actually, these are the two things that impressed me the most while reading your book.
Mm,
One is the amount of detail that is written in the specific locations. I was so impressed that your father remembered and he actually wrote them down like what time they had to wake up and what time they had to meet the people and what they ate and all these details.
yeah,
And the other thing, how wherever he went, he kind of immediately became a leader and someone who immediately found his way around and adjusted. Like that was so impressive to read. So I think the Kazakh part in your book, that's actually very one of the most important
yeah.
portions of that shows that. The next question is whether in Algeria your father knew that there were Sephardic and Berber Jews, or was there any differentiation between these groups?
I have no idea. He never mentioned it. I just know that the in the sports club there were Arabs and Jews. His best friend there was this guy George, and I think George had a brother too who became friends with my mom's sister. He was Jewish. He was a Sephardic Jew. But my dad had other friends, and he never, my father didn't. It's like someone who said that, like, the Chechens would have been Muslim, you should mention that in your book. Well, my father didn't say anything about it, so I didn't see why I should. He didn't pay any attention to that. He didn't care if someone was Jewish or Catholic or Muslim or, it didn't really matter. He didn't observe any Jewish holidays. He did at one point, it mentions in the book, he took off from work. This was after the war when he was back in Poland before he left, and he had a job, and he announced to the boss or whatever that he wasn't coming in the next day because it was Yom Kippur. But he didn't really celebrate Yom Kippur. I think he was just making a statement. My the only time my family ever went to a synagogue was for somebody's wedding or bar mitzvah. We didn't, and we didn't like Hanukkah candles at home either. So my dad just, those things didn't mean anything to him.
Thank you. What was your relationship like with your father? That's the next question. Big one.
Uh-huh. It was it. My dad was a difficult person. He would get very angry. He very rarely got angry with me. He liked me. He was disappointed that I was a girl and not a boy. He wanted to teach me to box, and it didn't work out. It just, and not only not box, but I'm just not athletic. I did go ice skating. I went horseback riding. I learned a little bit. I was never a good horse rider. I was never a good skater, and he was so athletic. So I think, but I like to dance and sing and other things. So, um, but I got along really well with my father because we had the same kind of political outlook, I think. He was to the left. I wouldn't say he was a socialist. He wouldn't have called himself a socialist, but he actually was a socialist kind of leaning. So we got along well politically, and I think we viewed the world the same way.
Thank you so much. There's a personal message from Mimi Wolf. She says she's thanking you for sharing the story, and she remembers Uri from Age Age and Camp Shomria, and she believes she's met you as well.
Yeah, in New York. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. We love to reconnect people. Were there any of your non-immediate family from Poland that survived the war and that you found through genealogy or other ways?
My mother had a cousin, I think he's a second cousin who lived in London. I don't know how she found him. But so I have cousins and second or whatever cousins in London. And I asked them about what they knew about family history. So, because that would be part of my family history. But they weren't interested and never responded. They responded to say that they didn't know and weren't interested. So that's that. And as far as I know, on my dad's side, there was nobody who survived. I don't know of anyone. I've tried to look up the name Bushaikin and didn't find anyone that, I only found two or three people with that name, period, on ancestry.com. So that's one of the things that maybe I'll, look into at some point. But as far as I know, I have no family on my father's side and just these two um, cous distant cousins on my mother's side.
Thank you. Is there an audiobook of the story?
No,
And is it possible to get a signed copy of the book?
for Zelda. Is that for Zelda? That's for Sue. Yeah, well, we'll figure something out.
Okay. Uh, okay. Um, is the book sold on Amazon? Yes, it is. We
Yeah.
will share the link tomorrow. As always, tomorrow you will receive from us the recording of this presentation, and you'll also receive the link to the book. But we can even I believe put it right away here in the chat, and it's also on the on
It's
the
also sold at
registration form where you signed up. So, but
it's
here.
also sold at Barnes and Noble. It's not only Amazon. And bookstores you wouldn't carry it because I'm not known, but it can be ordered at a bookstore. It's with a general distributor, so it can be bought from a bookstore. You'd have to order it, or Barnes and Noble or Amazon.
Thank you so much. Let's see if there are more questions. There are many comments and people sharing also their details if you want to be in touch. So let's see. There are many comments, and people are interested in reading your book and sharing about this their own. I saw some people even share their own stories and others who are congratulating you and feel very moved from your father's story. I agree that I think it's a very special story and really unknown and it's just incredible how your parents moved around and found their ways and managed to thrive even in the worst situations. And
I've always thought all my life, I've thought if I had been my mother in her situation, I don't think I would have survived. I mean, these people, my parents were so strong. You know, my father wasn't afraid of anything, and I can't tell if my mother was ever afraid. But I mean, to go through that Siberia and all that stuff, and for her, her husband's in prison and for 2 months, and she doesn't barely have enough to eat because he was always bringing the food home. He was the one who worked. Yeah, I don't know what she did. That's not clear because she never said, and she didn't write a memoir. So she did some work. I think some of it is in the book. She worked a little bit, uh, but she depended on him. I mean, I would have been scared to death. I don't think I would have made it. So, yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you, Dvora, for sharing this story with us and for writing the book and also showing the way how other people, I'm sure, get inspired also if they have some family memories and background that they want to research and know more about. I think it was so nice to hear also how you did the research and that there are many different ways to then work with it, but it was amazing to
You
hear
know, for
how
for
you
people
do.
that want to for people who want to write something like that, if they have family and they have sources, they can publish books themselves. I just want to say that because a lot of people think, oh, they have to find an agent, they have to find a publisher. They don't have to do that. And it doesn't cost very much money to do something like that. So if someone's really determined to get a story out there, it's not that impossible.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dwara. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You'll hear from us tomorrow with the recording and the details of the book. And we hope to see you all very soon. We have a very special event coming up this Thursday about Mosul in Iraq. It's by a researcher, a historian who was reporting during ISIS what was happening in Iraq, and he's in touch with Jews from Mosul, and he's really amazing. So we recommend to come. And actually, this Sunday we have a talk about genealogy. So that's another a talk that is a bit relevant or that is very relevant for today. We have a speaker who is a genealogist, and his main focus is Poland actually, but he knows details of how to research families in
No
many
water here.
different places as well. So if those of you who are interested in family research, we recommend very much to join. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Dvora, once again,
Thank
and
you. Thank you for having me.
we wish you all a wonderful rest of the day or good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.